I have to say, I when I was in Miami for work, taking care of the Holocaust survivor in December, and towards the last few days, I spent the Shabbos in Hollywood, Florida, with Rabbi Asher Meza, and I have to say that the Saturday, the Shabbos was a really great was really great. The Farbrengen at the house. I mean, you had a couple. I have to be honest with you, Rabbi. I mean, you had a couple of characters, but they were fun people and they were awesome. It was an awesome lunch. And then Sunday we did have. Oh yeah, Sunday was a. I you know what, I testify. I had an experience of a barbecue. We had a barbecue and. Yeah, the first. So what is it? The first Sunday of every month. You're gonna do that. That's
First
awesome,
Sunday of
man.
every month. It's gonna be wild, man.
That's cool. So we do have our good friend leaving the comments. He says he's in North Carolina, not much of a Jewish community, only a Reformed synagogue. Now, Rabbi, you said in the past that if a person only has a Reformed synagogue, that's not the worst thing in the world either. I mean, that's
no.
I mean, the way
Reform
people
is problematic. Conservative is slightly there. I mean, Reform, you didn't even have to believe in God to be Reformed.
Well, I mean, people make the Reform shul out like they're marrying cats and dogs there. I mean, they're not that bad, are they?
They are that bad. They are that bad.
Oof.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's better to go to a Messianic.
I've met some really lovable people. I met people
religious people
from Reform temples.
Reform?
They believed in God. Yeah, they were decent people. You know, they weren't that
better
bad.
to go to a Messianic synagogue than a Reform synagogue.
Oof, that's rough. I don't know if I can support that statement. Messianic over Reform.
Absolutely.
Oof.
Messianic over conservative. They're Torah keeping for sure.
Let's see. Plus, my rabbi is a woman. She's a nice woman, but it is a little bit of a stretch for me. Now, technically, that's not a forbidden in Torah to have a woman as a rabbi, no?
Torah doesn't mention rabbis, but like rabbi, or at least Rebbe back then, was a name that was given to the Amoraim of Israel. Rav was the name given to the Amoraim in Bavel. And in Eretz Yisrael, I mean, titles like Rabban was used, for sure, no woman was allowed to be a judge on the Sanhedrin with the exception of Devorah. There was an exception, and people were saying that was because of the sin of Israel that God chose a woman. I'm not saying a woman's not capable, but a woman's not allowed to sit on the Sanhedrin and actually be a judge, what we would call an actual rabbi. People nowadays aren't real rabbis. This ordination process was invented in 1538 as a ceremonial pursuit. Just like Christians have priests and bishops and Muslims have sheikhs and imams, Jews now have rabbis. But any knowledgeable Jew will tell you that the title rabbi doesn't really exist nowadays. It's just ceremonial. So technically, a woman could have that ceremonial title because it's not really tied to any type of authority. This is why in places like Yemen, where they never called their teachers rabbis, they would call them Mori or Chacham. It was only a group of individuals that started this whole rabbi movement and started building acronyms and acrostics with people's names like the Rambam and Rashi. Rashi wasn't called Rashi. The Ramban or the Rambam weren't called the Rambam or the Ramban because they didn't have the title rabbi back then. This is something that was invented maybe 200 years ago. The title rabbi wasn't used like a title. I mean, it could have been a descriptive term as a teacher or Rebbe, my teacher. But so technically, there's nothing really against Jewish law with making a woman a rabbi, just because rabbis, as they exist today, don't appear in Jewish law. But I'm against.
Yeah. See, I'm not all about reinventing the wheel, and I'm not here to change Judaism. The halacha is halacha, and the way people practice their minhagim and people's hashkafa and the way that their outlook on life and how they view Judaism is whatever. I mean, I can't do anything about it, but in a way, there's a side of me that says like Judaism. There's something's got to be done. I mean, to say that women, it's just the age we live in. I mean, how am I supposed to? I mean, I'm supposed to be against that. If a shul wants a woman to be the cantor and sing, and wanted to be a teacher, the rav. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like, it's almost like.
You're scared of your wife.
To go to I'm scared of the wife. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, but it's almost like what you're saying, Rav. Like it's better to go to a Messianic shul than a conservative shul. I mean, I guarantee at the Messianic shul they have women jumping up and down, acting like
That's not why I
too.
think it's
They
bad to
probably
be
have women
conservative or
cantors.
reform. It's for other reasons. It's just because they sort of trample on straight laws. They ordain gay clergy. I don't think it's a good environment for people's children. I for sure think that it's better for your kid to marry a Messianic than to marry a conservative or reformed Jew, because I guarantee you that the Messianic will be keeping more laws. And I don't believe in Jesus.
So where's the difference?
Uh-huh.
I have to be honest with you. Where's the line to be drawn? I mean, in a way, if a person wants to believe in it, you're going to have a spouse that you're going to marry your spouse who's a Messianic, who believes in Jesus Christ as a Lord and Savior. What makes it any better or wrong than a person that wants to be a homosexual and get married in a conservative shul? I mean, to me, it's like equally.
I see a huge
bad.
difference.
I mean,
one is violating a Torah command, but the other one is keeping Torah commands. The question is, who keeps more laws ultimately?
Being a Christian is against the Torah. God tells us not to worship idols.
Who says
Jesus Christ is an idol?
Jesus Christ is not an idol. Jesus Christ is not an idol.
Absolutely. Jesus Christ is
It depends on what would you say? He is a.
Now, we're not talking about traditional Christianity. We're talking about Messianic Jews. And I never said a traditional Christian. I specifically said a Torah-keeping Messianic Jew. Just like I don't consider Chabad idolatrous or heretical, even though they consider that their Rebbe is the divine essence in bodily form. I don't consider that idolatrous because it's not technically going against a Torah principle. They're saying that their Rebbe is in some way part of God, but they actually teach that every human being is part of God. For a Messianic to teach that JC was also part of God and even God himself, but it's the God of Israel, right? In some way manifested in human form, I don't see that violating a Torah principle. I think it's a misrepresentation to teach that they're worshiping an idol or some foreign god. I heard Tovia Singer argue with some Christian on the street saying, you worship a man. Messianics do not worship a man. Messianics worship an earthly representation of the God of Israel. Okay? I mean, it's not some other god. It's not Zeus and it's not Horus. Okay? It's clearly what the later rabbis called shituf, which is a partnership in the Godhead. Now, the Torah does not prohibit a partnership in the Godhead. I don't believe in it, and I think it's foolish. I agree with the Rambam's philosophy behind it, but it's not literally breaking a Torah command. I mean, to say that a Messianic...
Is it Messianic? They just believe that he is a Messiah?
No, some do.
God.
No, but I'm extending it to those who happen to attribute divine qualities to him. The whole notion of having a holy rabbi, someone who doesn't make mistakes, because that's what the notion of a Sadiq means nowadays in Kabbalistic talk. That's identical to how a Messianic who knows something, I'm not saying a fool, who's going to teach that Jesus is completely separate from the Father and it's independent, it's like a different God. No, if he's teaching it like Chabad teaches that a Rebbe is a representation of the invisible God in human form, I think that's philosophically foolish, but I'm not going to say that it's actually technically breaking any Torah command. I mean, the Torah never technically says that you can't split God up into pieces. I think it's wrong. I have a whole video. I think there's no other rabbi online who's attacked the whole notion of the Sefirot and the Godhead in Judaism and all that stuff more than I have. However, I've never called Chabad idolaters, and I never called them heretics, okay? But like many people who dislike Chabad say, I call it foolish. Now, someone could be wrong and foolish and not be an idolater and a heretic. The reason why those words really shouldn't be taken lightly or thrown around lightly is because they have a death penalty attached to it. You're telling me that the God of Israel would want to see you dead just because you think that he appeared to man in human form. You know how many times God appears to man in human form in Tanakh? Many, many times. That God himself appears as a man in front of people.
Isn't that where at the when they were speaking at the end of time, where the Gentiles and those who, let's just say those who did not believe, said that our fathers told us lies?
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
is it that where that comes into play? It wasn't necessarily, they wasn't within the covenant of the Israel. So they came to God as realizing that He is the true God, and they came before God saying, what I just said. So you can.
But,
It's
wait.
just a religion, right?
Yeah, but Gentile is
Yes.
not synonymous with Messianic Jew. I
Right.
consider someone who's Messianic, who keeps Torah fully, oral
Yes.
law and written law, as a Jew, as fully in the covenant. They're wrong, but I don't think that only because someone happens to believe in some false representation of the Messiah that he should be excluded from the Jewish people. Do you know what Jews believe? Many Jews believe weirder things.
Yes.
Right?
Now, I'm going to say this for me. I'm not sold on the oral law. Is that going to non and void my?
So according to the Talmud never speaks bad against Messianics or people who believe God has a body and stuff like that, but it does speak bad about people who don't believe in the oral law. Now, it's hard not to accept the oral law in the way that I teach it because I demystify it and I teach it just like the instructions of the court. That's it. I'm not trying to tell you that on Mount Sinai there was another set of laws given because I don't believe that.
Well, see, that's the point that I'm making is that, see, that's why, even though I am having a hard time with it, I'm still hanging around John and listening to Rabbi Asher. You two guys, mainly the two guys I listen to. There's two others, but I'm still learning, and it's a process. I'm not there yet, and just to be completely honest.
All right, but it's a shame that there aren't more rabbis who teach it like this. This is why I don't blame you, and I don't really blame any Karaite for choosing the path they've chosen, because what alternative do they have? Every time they're confronted by an Orthodox rabbi, they're forced to believe nonsensical ideas that aren't mandatory to believe. Like, you're not commanded to believe that the whole oral law was given on Mount Sinai, but what you are commanded to do is to keep that law. It doesn't matter how it came. Now, it says in the Torah that if you disobey the laws of the court, it's like disobeying the laws of God. But that's not what these rabbis are telling you. They're saying that you have to believe that another set of laws were given to Moses. Why don't you just include the Quran and the Book of Mormon? I mean, why stop at the oral law? In other words, if people could just add to the narrative, then Judaism will eventually just destroy itself. These people don't even know what they're doing. They're opening up the doors for sectarianism by doing that. I'm not as anti-Messianic as John is or James is. As someone who's constantly trying to defend Judaism in discussions and debates, I have to be very clear with what the Torah says. And the Torah doesn't necessarily condemn someone who takes God and say, okay, well, God appeared to me. God, like I said, does appear to people in human form in Tanakh. So what does the Rambam do? The Rambam says that anytime that happened, it was in a vision, it was in a dream, because God can't physically do that. Okay, but that's the Rambam. I mean, the Rambam existed from 1135 to 1205 of the Common Era. All right, this is much, much later. How about all the other rabbis who came before who did believe it? All right.
Well, I always believed that it was the messenger. It was speaking through this. What I've always angels. Right. It was always speaking through the angel. It wasn't because God clearly says that no one's ever seen him.
So angels in the Bible don't exist.
Right. I know. It's
but the word malach just means messenger.
Right.
So that means you have somebody in flesh and blood standing in front of a prophet, giving over God's words through his mouth. This is an earthly representation of God. Now, yes, philosophically it's problematic. This is why the Rambam has to explain it in a different way. But I'm not going to crucify people just because they want to take it literally. And I don't think God would be upset at them. There's too much thought police going around in the Jewish people that we're condemning people for what they think and what they believe. Who gives a crap what you think and what you believe? I care about how you behave.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, in the same breath, was it really a man or was it a spirit? Or was it, it's
what
hard.
does the text say? If the text
says it looks like three men.
Okay.
It's talking about Abraham, but, it didn't have to be flesh and blood. I mean,
that's not the only instance.
Yes.
There's one instance that Jacob wrestles with God himself. The messenger of God, the messenger of the Lord is God himself for all intents and purposes. Greek mythology.
Yeah, but it also says that he touched him on the hip, and it knocked. he wrestled with God, but he also touched him on the hip, and he had a limp for the rest of his days. So was he really wrestling with God, or was he wrestling with the things of God?
Right, correct.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Did he really wrestle with him? If he touched him on the hip, and you see my point. He was wrestling with what he had to. He's wrestling with the things of God, not wrestling physically.
Let's not paint a picture of what God is or what God isn't.
No, I'm just taking for what the scripture says. I'm not saying, I'm not adding to it, and I'm not taking away.
I'm not saying that God was completely a man at that moment, but that was an earthly representation of the God of Israel. That doesn't mean that if he was the God of Israel, he'd be like Superman picking up buildings. It's what the text says. I mean, how can I argue with what the text says as much as Muslims want to make fun of us for it? This is one reason they claim that the Torah is corrupt, because they're like, how can you believe that Torah that says that God became a man? You're such a fool, right? I'm being true to the text. Okay, I don't believe it. I believe like the Rambam teaches, but at the same time, I'm not going to condemn someone and call them an idolater. Idolater, first of all, I don't even think the term appears in Torah. There's avodat pesilim or avodat elilim, like the worship of statues or the worship of other gods. But is that really what praying to the person they call Yeshua is? Praying to a different God? I mean, that's kind of a misrepresentation of the prohibition. No, these people think that it's the God of Israel. I'm just trying to be honest, intellectually honest.
I'm being honest is that instead of praying to God, they're praying to a man God.
That's true.
Yeah, but it's not a man God. They believe it's the same God of Israel. That's why it's complicated. It would be so much easier.
Well, they say the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, and there are three different people.
No, it's a mystery of the Trinity, and they believe it's one God. No Christian walks around calling themselves an idolater or saying that they worship.
Of course not.
But they also don't call themselves polytheist. They believe they're praying to one God. Yeah, so Mormons is a different thing, because Mormons actually believe in three completely different gods, and you could be that fourth Godhead if play your cards right. When we're discussing religion with people and we really care about people and want to see the best for them, we have to give them the benefit of the doubt. We can't condemn people because they're not convinced of something. And I'll tell you what, like someone, if all they had was Tanakh and they didn't have the rabbis and they didn't have the Rambam and they read it straight through, I don't think they would condemn this notion of at least Messianic Judaism. The problem I have with Christianity is they toss away the commandments. Then it's automatically just like Islam. It's a different religion. But someone who believes in the God of Israel, but that there's a man who came as an earthly representation of that God of Israel, I don't see that worthy of the death penalty. And I wouldn't call that idolatry or the worship of foreign gods. I would love to have this discussion with Tovia Singer. I mean, he has this simplistic understanding of idolatry. I mean, he thinks Islam is not idolatry because they worship one God. So like if you worship a turtle, are you not an idolater? I mean, it's stupid. People don't think. They just sort of repeat what everyone else says. There's even Rabbeinu Bachya Ibn Pekuda. He writes in The Duties of the Heart that God will not condemn someone who takes biblical statements literally in his ignorance. In other words, if he's not philosophically intelligent and able to make an argument like the Rambam or like some other religious philosopher and in a sophisticated manner explain what God is and what God isn't. No, if you just read it straight through and you see that God has appeared to people in bodily form, how can you then condemn someone as an idolater, as worshiping a foreign God, if he's keeping all of Torah, but he has some sort of weird understanding of God appearing to people for 33 years on this planet and then dying and possibly coming back again? I don't see that's enough to kick people out of. I mean, I just don't see it. I mean, I wish there was a law in the Talmud that would help me, or a law in the Torah, but it's not in the Talmud. It's not in the Torah. It's only in Achronim and late Achronim. I just think that people solidify their Judaism nowadays in the fact that they're not Christian. And it's just like there's a lot of mainly Messianic bashing. I'm not defending Christians. I'm defending Messianics here.
You always got to look back and put down the people that you left behind. And that's one of the problems I have with a lot of people out here that they come out of Christianity or they come out of whatever, and they want to bash wherever they left. But, 2 weeks ago, they were on their knees before that cross in front, just like everybody else. So, yeah.
It would be a shame if every Christian would disappear tomorrow. the world would fall into anarchy. What they're doing is what Jews should have done, which is sensitize the world with the word of God. We have to call things how they are. I mean, I'm not trying to join a club here or join a gang, right? I mean, I'm in search of truth. And I want people to appreciate me and my lectures because they know when they come to my lectures, they're not going to get any fluff. They're going to get the straight, I call it like I see it. And that's really should be the approach. This is why I think I'm successful, like in my discussions, because I'm not trying to fit in. People are, oh, how could you say that? Well, this rabbi's against. Who gives a? I mean, come on.
See, you're
thank God for
overeducated.
source material.
See, you're so damn smart. People can't out-thank you. That's why you win.
No, I don't know about that.
Hey, can y'all hear me?